Okay, councillors, we'll reconvene. Thank you. These recommendations have been moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Barrett. The floor is yours to speak to it. I have had notice from a notice of motion, which is in the name of Councillor Beattie, which I'll come to after you speak. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my pleasure to move this motion and speak in endorsement of it. I think it's very good to see this next stage of the cycling master plan actually rolled out and giving effect to that plan for our community. We've consistently heard messages from people concerned about road safety, concerned about safety for riding their bikes, and we talk and hear from a lot of people that would like to get on their bike and go for a bike ride, but they simply don't feel safe because there isn't safe space on the road for them. That is particularly the case in busy roads such as Summerhill is, and so it is very good to see a option come forward that will create some safe space for people and give them the opportunity to get on their bikes, whether it's for recreation, for commuting, or what other reason they wish to. I will say that I have a level of ambivalence around recommendation 2, and that I feel we could potentially take sort of staged approaches to the mitigation. I sort of feel like we've thought about all the possible concerns, wrapped up a big budget, and thrown it at it. I think there's some very critical concerns around the businesses there, but some of the other concerns I'd be a little bit more interested to see how the traffic flows actually manifest, how things might actually change once the new road configuration comes in before needing to pour the full 234K into it. But you know, whichever way we go there, we need some sort of mitigation budget, so it's reasonable that something's there. I do want to thank the officers for you know, taking a more effective approach, I think, to community consultation and feedback than we had in College Street, certainly. I think we've learned some lessons from College Street, and we've begun to implement them in Summerhill Drive. Clearly, we haven't got it perfect because there's still some concerns around how that was done and some ideas for how it could be done better, and I think we should always be willing to take those on board and look at better approaches to consultation. But in general, I think the breadth and depth and tone of what was done in terms of consultation was a step up from College Street, and wanted to thank officers for that. I think it's also been quite wise in this one to really sort of tackle the crux of it first, because this is the area that probably does have the most challenges along that whole length of Summerhill Drive that we want to deliver. And I kind of like the idea of starting with the crux, figuring that out, and then moving forward. And if we think about, again, where we're at with College Street, we've sort of started on the easy bits and working our way towards the crux. So, look, some of the feedback from community on this, actually, done a fair bit of listening, I suppose, to feedback on it since the consultation while it's been out there in the public realm. Actually, you know, quite a few of the property owners on Summerhill are actually quite looking forward to not having on-street parking there, blocking their view of relatively high-speed traffic coming at them, because what they're currently having to do is try to nose out past the big ute to see if there's anybody coming along at anything between 50 and 80 kilometers an hour that's going to clean their front end out. Taking that parking off the road will actually greatly improve safety outcomes for them. It'll improve the safety outcomes for them in terms of, currently I think their hearts are in their throat when they're taking their little kids across that road at times, again trying to see out around parked vehicles to where traffic may be. So seeing some pedestrian crossing facility come in as well is fantastic. And then obviously the sort of target user group here with people wanting to ride their bikes. I recall talking to now a former member of IPU staff about the potential there for getting students on their bikes up and down from IPU, and the potential for getting people in general commuting from Summerhill wherever they're going. And again, it was just reinforced to me how it wasn't actually the hill that was the issue. It was the safety or lack of safety along that stretch of quite busy road, the potential of getting doored, the potential of somebody being distracted and causing a tragedy was what was putting people off riding. So this will actually directly address what is the key constraint on people choosing to get on their bikes in that part of the city, and form a vital part of the network again. So I think we've heard a bit around the shared path and how, while it sounds nice, as soon as you start to drill in, it doesn't quite fit the bill. And we've heard about why $18,000 car parks are $18,000 car parks. So I won't comment too much more on those, but just say, again, overall, this gives effect to the master plan that we've set out, and will deliver a number of benefits in terms of getting people on their bikes, and the transport, health, et cetera, outcomes that we expect from that. So I'd ask you to vote in support of the recommendations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Beattie, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy with option A, and I'm happy with the cycle lane. But what I want to do an amendment on, or I think it's an amendment I'm doing,
there'll be an amendment,
is to do this in 2 stages so that we can review what we've done, so that we can take all the parking out and then review it. And that way, the 234,000 is contestable. We can still leave that budget in there if it's required, but officers have said parking there is only 19% utilisation. And why go in and spend 234,000 when we don't need to start off with, and just reassess it afterwards and look at how the parking, by doing the yellow lines, how it's affecting the residents? Because it may be money that we can put into another project or extend more safety somewhere else. I just think we're rushing out to spend money where we haven't done a review of the outcomes of what we're doing, and it's just all it is staging it. I'm not saying let's not do it. I'm just saying stage it and have a look. Do we really need to spend that 234,000, or it might be that we only need to put 6 car parks in there? But it gives us the option of not rushing out just to spend this money when we've got such tight budgets. It's different when you've got plenty of fat in your budget, but we haven't, and that money could be better spent somewhere else, or if not, spent where it should be spent after we've done the review.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Naylor, as the seconder of that amendment, would like to speak now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supporting this amendment because I am also comfortable with option A, but I'm not comfortable with the additional unbudgeted cost of the indented parking, and I do believe it's something that can be considered at a later stage. And just to clarify, it's not getting rid of all the parks. The report shows that there are a total of 344 existing car parks in the area. Option A would reduce this by 34%, which my calculations takes it to 227. So removing the 13 would take it to 214. So what we're saying is, without approving that additional budget at this point, there still will be 214 parks in the area, and I think it would be appropriate to be able to assess how the community adapt to that before we decide on an additional $234,000 budget, which may or may not be needed. So I'll be supporting this amendment and won't be supporting recommendation 2.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson, followed by the Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, I want to speak to the amendment, but also the substantive. Do you want me to just combine them?
Yes, if we can combine all our comments to
thank you.
To the second recommendation also.
So just speaking to the amendment first, I don't support it. And the reason I don't support it is that the additional parking mitigation was proposed as the result of consultation with the community and submissions received. And the community is expecting the mitigation of parking. For us to remove it at this point, I think would be not acting in good faith, because the consultation has occurred. We've listened to this, we've been informed of the submissions. We've heard comment that one of the biggest concerns of people around this proposal is the loss of parking. And at this stage, for us to say that we're not going to do any parking mitigation, I don't think is holding faith with the community. So I'm not prepared to support it. We need to be aware that there is opposition to these sorts of changes. We want to get our urban cycleway master plan through, and to do so we need to be prepared to compromise with community where concerns are raised. So I'm not prepared to support the amendment. In general though, I do support option A, and I want to remind elected members that there was a life lost on this stretch of road not all that long ago, where a cyclist was hit by a lorry. So I do think that there is a need to get on with this, and I wouldn't like to see it deferred or refused. I do want to address one question that seems to come up whenever we discuss cycle lanes, which is, what are the current cyclist figures for the road? Now, the current cyclist figures for the road bear absolutely no relation to what the cyclist figures for the road might be if you built a cycleway. And the best analogy I've come across on this is the analogy of a bridge across a river. So if there is no bridge, you don't decide whether to build one or not based on the number of people that swim across the river. So sometimes it feels a little bit like we're in Groundhog Day here, doing the same discussion and arguments over and over again. But ultimately, council has made the decision to move on with making safe cycling possible for people in the city, and we need to follow that through, bearing in mind that some compromise will be needed from time to time to meet the needs of the particular community in that space. Thank you.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I can understand where the amendment's coming from, but actually, if we don't do something in terms of mitigation for the businesses, especially, you're basically signing the death warrant of at least one of them, possibly two. So I think that's extremely unfair, and I do think that if this amendment had been staged with something around the businesses, I probably would have supported it. But this is a carte blanche, no mitigation at all, and I tell you, you will hear the wrath of people. So I agree with what we're trying to do for all the. I mean, I live in that area. I sort of know roughly with a gut feel the parking there, and I think if it had been staged around the businesses where there is a lot of need for it, elsewhere I've got perhaps a mixed view. I would have supported it, but I can't support this no indented parking being in there at all. We're going to kill those businesses immediately. They do rely on some off-street parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are around a comment made by the public today about shared pathway. I'm not the fan of the shared pathways and such, but I think we could have a separate pathway in the area that the person was talking about. And I don't think it's been investigated enough. We hear the officers' views that this doesn't work because they end up and down and a couple of other bits and pieces and sharing a path. But I don't think it's actually been looked at where it's worked really well in a number of other places around the world with a lot more cars, a lot more pedestrians and a lot more cyclists. So I feel that's something that going forward as a council, we need to start looking at a little bit more. If we want to really get safety on our roads, we need to take our cyclists off the road. Okay, is the most successful way. And so I'll leave it at that. I just feel that it's something that needs to be looked at a little bit more rather than just pushed off as the too hard basket.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking briefly to the amendment, I think I'm pretty much where the mayor's at on it. If there had been a sort of halfway house, I probably would have been in a position to support, but I think, yeah, going forward with no indent parking, particularly around those businesses, is not, it's just sort of buying ourselves a fight. And I think especially once we get back into the city, if we look at the next lists on the master plan, we're talking about Albert Street, we're talking about Featherston Street, we're talking about probably much more challenging scenarios, frankly, than we face in Summerhill Drive. And I think we need to be careful about setting a precedent that shows, as Councillor Johnson said, that we go through a consultative process, we listen to the feedback, and we adapt and respond, and avoid that temptation to get too hands-on in the chamber. So again, if there had been something there that was a bit staged or a bit 50-50, I might have gone for it, but I think 0 is a bit too big a cut at this point, so I can't really support the amendment as it is.
Thank you. And just finally, my comments would be very much aligned to Councillor Barrett around don't wanting to buy us a fight, and let alone some of the other issues that we need to deal with around our cycle network. I'm going to call for a vote for the amendment. And do you want to write a reply, Councillor Beattie, before we do that?
Yeah, my only comments will be that actually not having the indented parking actually makes the roads safer, because those cars do have to manoeuvre in and out of indented parking. And my rationale behind the businesses is that in future, in the report, the access way in and out of that business, the landscaping business actually leases to the coffee cart. And there's actually access on that land for it to go in and out. And later, when they change that driveway to have access in, it will actually be safer than having indented parking there. So we're going to go ahead and spend $36,000 there when we'd be better to invest in a much better, safer access way. So that money in the future will be a waste. So that's my 2 comments.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite you to vote on the amendment. That is last, 3 votes for, 11 against. That moves us back to the substantive recommendations. And again, I'd invite you to vote. That has passed 12 votes for and 2 against. That moves us on to item 8, which is the Papaia Place redevelopment 6 monthly update, and welcome Bryce Hoskins to the table. No. The reason being, that's the lawyer. We didn't have any legal questions. So we just do it. Welcome.
Good morning, councillors. Happy to take this paper as read and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There are some questions coming through. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is about the diagram in attachment 1, where it seems like there are no gardens, no little gardens in front of the units for section 5A.
Yeah, I can confirm that there are. This is a very sort of high level concept, really, just to illustrate where portions 5A, B and 6 are in relation to the site.
So they will have the little gardens that everyone else has got?
Yes, there's quite a substantial landscaping that's going with them.
Good, thank you. And the other question was just that it doesn't specifically say in the report, but I assume that everything is on time at the moment?
Yes, it is. The project is still on track to be finishing in around August next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's no other questions, Bryce. Thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Any comments or debate? There being none, I'll invite you to vote. That's passed 13 votes for and none against. It moves us on to item 9, which is the Tamakuku Terrace Residential Subdivision 6 monthly update. And again, welcome Bryce to the table.
Good morning again, and I'm also happy to take this report as read and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Open it up. Are there any questions of the report? Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of 4.2, when we're undertaking the affordable housing expression of interest process, how do people actually find out about this? How do we get the expressions of interest? What's the process?
So there will be quite a substantial comms plan that will be coming along with that. There'll be a little bit of direct engagement with a number of parties of interest, as well as potentially the opportunity for the wider marketplace to be getting involved. But I might pass over to Sasha to add some comments to that.
Thank you. Sasha.
Just so in terms of addressing affordable housing, what we're doing is splitting the process up into two parts. The first part is the direct approach to known housing, affordable housing developers that we know of, and also government agencies to get a pre-sales expression of interest from them about purchase of lots. So that will occur between December and February as the intended time period. In a sales and marketing pack specifically for those agencies is being developed currently, so that we can have those face-to-face meetings and talk them through the development and get their interest by February. And then we're looking to go to more public sale to allow the balance of lots to be available for public and other developers. So that's the sales process. In terms of the pack, there's the business-to-business pack, which is the first stage, which we're going to meet with these agencies directly. And then the second part is sort of the more public information about the lots. And so the price, we're currently undertaking a pricing review. We've had a first tranche of provisional pricing, and that's being valued against market values at the moment, so that we can confirm the pricing levels. That first stage will allow for that affordable housing component and expressions of interest in that area, so that we can earmark those lots for those agencies, and then we have the balance for public sale. There'll be a communications plan and a pack provided to councillors on the approach and FAQs and so on as this information is being developed. And on site there'll be signage. We're going through resource consenting at the moment for on-site signage, and the website has been developed as well. So there's quite a lot of work going on in the background.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just concerned about the time framing of this being December to, if you want proposals in by February, because a lot of the agencies and people in the houses, housing area, they're all going to be on leave, and we'll need to contact, consultants or whatever they may want to talk to. So if they've got to have their proposals in by February, I'm just a bit concerned about the timing.
That's the advice we've had from our Veros, our consultants who deal a lot with Kaingaroa and those agencies in terms of that time frame. So they're comfortable with that. It also allows for us to know some agencies may not be interested at all, and then we can obviously move on from there. But it does give us and them the period of time to express their interest and understand to what extent they might be interested, so we can allow that in our planning for the next phase of sales.
So when you say February, are you saying what date in February?
We're looking at early February, but if more time is required, we can allow that. There's flexibility there.
Just for the smaller ones, if I could just say mid-February.
Yep.
Thank you.
No further questions? Thank you, Bryce. Is there somebody prepared to move the recommendations? Councillor Dingwall, Councillor Beattie seconded. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'd invite you to vote. That has passed, 13 votes for and 1 abstention. Moves us on to item 10, which is the Arena Redevelopment Quarterly Update, and welcome again, Bryce, to the table.
Good morning again. Also happy to take this one as read and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bryce. It was just a question about 4.9, the gender neutral toilet facilities. My understanding that this issue only came to light because of the elected member visit on the site, that there was an expectation that gender neutral facilities would be provided, and that hasn't come through in the project. So can you explain how that got missed in the first place and give us some comfort that it won't happen again?
Yes, correct. This was highlighted from elected members. The simple answer is it was an oversight in the design. We have gone back to look at that ablutions block and sort of robustly taken a look to see if we can come up with a, I guess, a good outcome of how that could be achieved. Unfortunately, there isn't really a way through that, which leaves a couple of options. So there is an opportunity in the future to be building a separate block, but over and above that, speaking to John from Arena Operations, we are actually able to repurpose some toilets within the grandstand side of the facility and actually repurpose them as the gender neutral toilets. So there will actually be some permanently on site, just not through the new ablutions block, which is a great outcome.
Great. And
I have an additional comment from the GM too.
Sorry, it's just in terms of that to respond. I guess when the ablution block, we had the project steering group meeting and this was raised there as well, and understandably so. We had, when the design for the original ablution block was done, the profile around gender neutral toilet and accessibility was probably a lot less, and now that has obviously escalated in terms of profile, and so we've adjusted the plans around how we manage the toilet provision across the facility. So in the grandstand, which is the main area for pedestrian traffic to come into the arena, we are changing the female components of the female toilets to gender neutral toilets, which was actually probably a better location than the speedway pits, which actually generates a lesser traffic flow in terms of pedestrians for general events going on at the arena.
And so just to clarify that there'll be signage on the new ablution block to say that there are gender neutral.
Yep, we can do that. Yep.
Available.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Also following up 4.9 to 4.11. I just wanted to, Councillor Bonus transfers some of the questions. I just wanted to ask whether or not there is, whether or not you consider that there is a policy directive from Council around gender neutral toilets being provided in new builds.
We have one directly around public toilets within the facility. There isn't one specifically around creating gender neutral toilets within facilities. However, yeah, that's basically the current status of that.
So do you think it would be helpful if such a policy came through Council, or do you feel that there's sufficient direction?
I feel there's sufficient direction. This is along with accessibility. It's something that gets considered on new builds. As I said, in this case, that was not. However, this is definitely something that we take into consideration whenever we're designing anything like this moving forward. So, an oversight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Harpiter. Open it up for any comment or debate. There being none, I'd like, oh, sorry. Okay, I'll call you now. Councillor Johnson, then followed by Councillor Harpiter.
Yeah, I do just want to follow up this issue of the gender neutral toilets, because it was something that a number of us remarked on our visit around the facility. And whilst it may seem small in the scheme of such a big project, I suppose it was a bit surprising that it took comments from elected members to alert the wider project team to this issue. And I would just like to make sure that it is on record that this is our policy going forward, whether it be public toilets in the sense of standalone toilets in a park or reserve, or toilets in a facility that we're constructing, because it's 2020. I feel like this has been an issue for a number of years. I remember, it's not a recent thing. I remember when I was standing for council in 2013, it was a live issue at that point. And I'm sure it's been an issue for longer than that. So, it's a small effort to accommodate a proportion of the population, but it makes a big difference to those individual people. And so I would like to think that in future it wouldn't take, a bit of a sort of a nudge from elected members before these things were addressed.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Yes.
Sorry. This system is actually playing up. I did call Councillor Harper before, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Bowen. Sorry. Apologies. Some people haven't been queued into the speaking order. Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Bowen. As a member of the steering group, we did spend probably 10 minutes talking about the gender neutral toilets, and we did talk about this at length and did say to the project manager and to Sasha and to Bryce that we did need to make sure that we mentioned it at the meeting today, and that to say that and Sasha did come up with this discussion that we were going to bring it up, and that there was another alternative, even though it had been overlooked at the main block, but it was going to be put into the FNG, what's it called, title? CET. The CET building. It is a big priority for the project, and it hasn't been overlooked, and it is something that they are going to be doing. So it isn't something that the steering group has overlooked. It is something that is a priority for them. So I do want council members to know that it is a focus, and it is something that hasn't been overlooked as a steering group.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I was glad to receive the comments from officers. I think it's important that we look at the facility as a whole and not just the upgrade that's going on in that specific new build. So I'm encouraged that the facility as a whole will have the opportunities that we see as really important to provide gender neutral facilities. I'd just like to be sure that the signage reflects that. And I'm very comfortable with all of the wayfinding signage and that heritage and cultural overlay that we've been talking about. So I think actually we will get to a situation that is where this council had always imagined that we would be. Because as Councillor Johnson said, this isn't a new issue for this council. I remember former Deputy Mayor Tangi Utakere raising an issue through annual budget, I think 2014, 2015. So this is something that we've been talking about for a long time. And it's important, and I don't want to see it get lost. So I'm not saying what I think the answer should be. I'm just saying I want to make sure that we've captured those concerns and that there is a solution in all of our projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also agree with some of the comments that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bowen has raised around these gender neutral toilets. I think it's great that staff have come up with a solution to try and fix this mistake, but I think part of the issue actually is when we're having to fix this mistake, you're now creating a gender neutral toilet that is far away, well, that is away from the female and male toilets, and that kind of by default creates a bit of segregation there, and I would like that to not happen in any of our buildings or public toilets ever again, really. You know, it would be great to have female, male, and gender neutral, or just gender neutral. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. My comments on the more broader project, and it's really pleasing to see from the Cuba Street entrance the fencing coming up and being able to see into some of the major works that have happened to the pit particularly, and now moving into the entranceway plaza and the link span bridge. A little bit lagging in the availability of the pits, which will be opened at the end of the month, end of December, but otherwise the project timeline is still on track for completion in April, and thank you to the officers for their work and their hand in it. No further speakers. I'd now like to invite you to vote. Everyone's voted? That has passed 15 votes for and none against. Moves us to item 11, which is the Streets of People East, Square East, Stage 2 final report, and welcome Jeff Sneddon, our Manager for Project Management Office. Welcome.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present this finished report for Stage 2 Streets of People. I'll take the report as being read and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Open it up for any questions. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And look, yeah, just a very quick question. Just in terms of paragraph 3.4, which is around budget and cost, there's just a comment there just around the variations, but there's no kind of sort of detail in there. I'm not asking for explicit detail, but can you give us some ballpark kind of sort of areas where that expenditure overruns? Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there were a couple of main ones. One was EOT for COVID, which we were required to pay to Higgins. So that's in the order of approximate, well, I wouldn't like to say, but it's quite large. Not estimate, I'd probably estimate it's probably about 30 to 40% of the total. Hang on, let's work this out. 30. I'd say it's about 30% of the total. And there were a number of underground services that we had to relocate that we didn't know were there, which is normally the case for these sorts of projects. And the other, one of the other main changes is that we've added in the street lights on Stage 1 into this work as well. As one of the councillors pointed out, that it would be very valuable to do that at the same time.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks. It's just a question around 3.5 key lessons learned. So in the key lessons learned, you've put closing the street to vehicle traffic, both lanes, reduces the contract period and the cost compared with leaving one vehicle lane open, which obviously it does. But my understanding was that there was quite a lot of opposition from retailers for the street being closed completely, and that the message that I certainly heard was that retailers would have preferred one lane to have remained open, even if that extended the contract period. So I don't know if you agree that that was the message that we got from retailers, and if so, should we be including in lessons learned that closing the street to vehicle traffic is our sort of preferred way of doing things, because I'm not sure that that was necessarily what we would want to repeat. So I know that was a bit long-winded, so to cut to the chase, do you think the retailers would agree with that lesson or
the
not?
retailers have mentioned to me, and when I've gone and met with them, that closing the street to vehicle traffic did impact them. More than in Stage 1, where at least the parking on their side was still open. So yes, I agree with that. From our point of view, or I guess from a project point of view, when the lesson that we've got out of this is that we need to look at both options to see and actually ask the contractors to price up both options, rather than just going and assuming that this is the best way of doing it, i.e. one lane open, one lane closed, like we did in Stage 1.
Okay, so I wonder then if in lessons learned around closing the street or not closing the street, we also should include the counterpoint that whilst closing the street reduces the contract period and the cost, leaving one lane open may be more acceptable to retailers or something like that. I just feel that, you know, if in X number of years' time we're not around and someone else is reading this, they might take it that closing the street was the desirable thing. Anyway, leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks for the report. Just on the budget and cost under 3.4, we've got the total for this stage of 2, and I'm sure it's been reported to us previously, but what was the total for stage 1?
I believe it's an order of 1.1 to 1.2 million.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Councillor? Happy with that?
I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jeff. Question is just around next steps, and I guess how this is sort of being pitched to us as a final report, but it's sort of a final report about a piece of infrastructure investment that the city's got a great deal of interest in, and that we've talked about as a city shaping move and all these other type things. So I didn't see anything in next steps sort of around monitoring sort of ongoing impact of this sort of investment in sort of city vitality, and just wondered, is there anything planned to actually help us understand or capture the impact and benefit of this investment?
I don't know. Hang on. I'm not sure if I'm the best place to answer that question. It may be David Murphy might be able to help you on that. I do know that we have got a counter on the street at the moment counting pedestrians, and we're actively monitoring our frog parking data so that we can respond to the changes in terms of parking requirements in that particular space.
GM might want to comment a little bit more.
Yeah, I understand Robert Van Bentum's team have just installed a pedestrian counter along this part of the street. Also, the strategy and planning staff during the construction period were doing regular monitoring of pedestrian counts. That was to sort of primarily manage the impact of the construction, which was a key issue for the retailers, but that has continued relatively informally. But again, it's a very manual, time-consuming process where we've got senior staff out counting numbers. So I think it is an area of work we need to reflect on and improve on when we deliver the subsequent stages of this project, to make sure that we have pre and post numbers so we can actually monitor the true performance of this investment.
Great, thank you both. Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hapara.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jeffrey. The socialising the design with retailers early to enable change to design, did you feel that they had any input into it, or was it all set in concrete so they really didn't have any input?
I guess I qualify that in the sense that I came into the role when we were pretty much negotiating the contract, the tender price with the contractor. It was feedback I received from the retailers that they would have liked to have more. I don't know how much they did have, but there were opportunities, like the coffee club mentioned, there was opportunities for them to do different things in front of their area, or for want of a better word, their area, than what was reflected in the original design. So I think that in hindsight, yes, if we continued dialogue with the retailers, we would have continued to update and reflect that in the design process.
Design, or more about the implementation of the project?
The particular comment that refers to was around the design. There was also an ongoing, wanted to be kept informed of our thoughts about how we were going to implement the project as well, but this particular comment was more around the design. The comment was made, we've been here 10 years, we know how the street works, and we think we've got something valuable to add into the design process.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One was originally the street layout limited right-hand turns when you entered the square from Princess Street?
From Church Street.
Yeah, on Church Street, sorry. When you entered from the Princess Street end, entering into the square, there was no right turn originally. Was that always only ever a trial, or was that what the original proposal was?
The original proposal was to retain the right-hand turn. We took the opportunity to have a trial to see if that was going to improve pedestrian flow between Square East and encourage people out of the mall.
Okay, thank you. And as far as the layout, is the bus movements, have they been seamless as far as taking the left-hand turns and turning out from the roundabout? Has that worked as you intended?
We've had no issues with the bus use. We did, once the curbs were formed and in place prior to opening, we did do a trial with the buses to make sure that they could do the bus movement through the street. But no, we've had no issues with the bus movement themselves.
Great. Any other further questions? Did you have another one? Councillor Bowen, finally.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies. I thought I'd queued. Thank you, Jeffrey. The last bullet point in 3.5, where you talk about picture framing, which apparently means something entirely different to what I thought it meant. I just wondered, with your alternative that you're proposing of laying pavers on a mortar base, whether that would have implications for permeability of the surface and stormwater runoff and those kind of things in future.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think there are a number of options that we can investigate to try and address the picture framing. The picture framing is caused by moisture getting into the pavers from underneath, and putting them on mortar may reduce that. You are right, it'll have a knock-on effect in terms of permeability. Also, it may have a knock-on effect on access to services underneath, so may increase maintenance costs. So there are a whole lot of factors there that we would like to have a look at before we start rolling out any more stages.
In your 4.2, you talked about the defect period. I just want to check, were there any surprises there, or were?
No, because we've been working with the contractor quite closely the whole way through the project. And the defects period is a standard contract of 12 months, which will run out in 2nd of August, I think, is next year. And as we pick up defects, as they're through wear and, or not necessarily wear and tear, but we notify the contractor. We're looking at plans for addressing some of the what we've perceived as being not as good a standard as we would have liked in some of the areas, and they'll be addressing those in the coming months over the summer. Good.
And my last question, 4.3, in your signalling, a higher level of service being required for cleaning and maintenance. So I suppose 2 points to that question. Is that just because there's more stuff that we've got to look after, because it's quite a busy space? And how will that feed through into future Streets for People projects? Will there be a higher level of service required as we work through these projects?
Short answer is yes. We felt footpath that is approximately 3 metres wide to a paved footpath that's 4 to 5 to 6 metres wide. We've put in more assets in that space. So yes, the overall, we have lifted the quality of the streetscape, and therefore we really need to be lifting the quality of maintaining that streetscape to ensure that it continues to be a high quality space.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. No further questions. I'm happy to move the report, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Move the recommendation, sorry. Any other comments or debate? There being none, I'd like to invite you to vote. Did you speak to that has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Moves us on to item 12, which is the committee work schedule. Are there any questions on this? No questions. I'm happy to move. Seconded by Councillor Hapera. No comment or debate. No comment at least. I invite you to vote. That's passed 15 votes for and none against. Now I'd like to move into part 2 for the exclusion of the public for item 14, which is negotiations of the Manawatu River pathway, and the reasons for passing into part 2 is negotiations. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Hapara. No comments? Invite a vote. That's passed 14 votes for and none against.